My talk ties in with everything else we've been talking on the potassium side this afternoon, but trying to just work out what's actually happening in terms of magnesium and sodium, how they affect potassium uptake by plants. Take-home messages, really fairly simple. In another couple of months, hopefully I've got a bit more information than this, but so far, in highly sodic soils, the higher concentration of sodium actually reduces potassium concentration in the soil solution. So for any level of exchangeable K, if you've got the same soil but it's sodic, you'll be reducing available potassium in the soil solution. Highly magnesic soils, like around Birchall, the effect's much less clear. But for both of those soils, it may not actually be the effect of the cations on solution potassium concentration that's important. It could actually be some of the soil physical effects, which sort of overrule everything else. Okay, so we're seeing quite a bit of potassium deficiency showing up around the place. In some areas, though, it seems to be connected with high magnesium or sodic soils. So, for example, in Birchall, they have a lot of soils where there's about 40% magnesium in the soil, or you're looking at sodic soils, 10-15% exchangeable sodium percentage, and levels of potassium that aren't particularly severely deficient show deficiency symptoms in the plant. So, is there some sort of a connection there? If you look at cation competition theory and what it's up to in the soil, you would expect that high levels of these other cations could actually be playing with how much potassium is available to the plants. Okay, so the three ways that potassium availability can possibly be affected. One is you've got concentration of potassium in the solution, so that's how much potassium is coming off the exchange complex in the solution. Next one is during uptake by the plant root, you can get cation competition between these different cations as they enter the root. Plant roots also sort of have an exchange capacity, so there are some cations are actually attracted to the root more than others. And the final one, soil physical conditions. As Ian was saying, soil physical structure is one of the really important parts in what drives soils. So anything that increases our, reduces pore size, increases how tortured that sort of pores are, is probably going to increase the path length for potassium when it's diffusing into the plant. And diffusion is critical for potassium. About 90% of the plant's potassium supply comes in by diffusion. So that diffusion gradient is really important. Okay, so what have I been trying to do? One of the problems with looking at either magnesium or sodic soils is that how do you actually do a comparison? If you grab a sodic soil and a non-sodic soil from different areas, they're different soils. They're going to have different organic matters, different cations, different mineralogy. So to get around that problem, we created some sodic soils or highly magnesic soils. We took a soil, we washed it with different cation solutions and changed the cations that were on that exchange capacity. We used two different soils, one from Birchall, which is a cropping soil. We know it's got low potassium and high magnesium, and we matched it with a similar Birchall from Armadale, so it's got a similar cation exchange capacity. It had high magnesium, plus it also had high potassium, and it was a pasture-based soil rather than cropping. We treated with these different cation solutions, and we measured what cations, in particular what potassium was on the exchange, and what was in solution. So what sort of effects have we got? First up, in Birchall soil, so this is exchangeable potassium across the bottom and potassium in solution up the side. So for any solution concentration of potassium, we've got the same amount of potassium on the exchange complex. The different lines here, these are different magnesium percentages in the soil. So this technique was quite good. We've got soils ranging from basically no magnesium up to 98% magnesium. Whatever level of magnesium, we've got the same result here. If our critical level of potassium is 1 1/4, we end up with 0.35 per ml in solution. That was the first one I did, and I thought, well, that's great, there's no story here. Then I did the Armadale soil, and got a bit of a surprise, because the answer is quite different. If our critical level for potassium is 0.35, in these soils with a lot more calcium, so a lot less magnesium, our critical level, again, is about 1 1/4. But if we go for the highly magnesic soil, our critical level's gone up by about 60 or 70% to almost 2 centimoles. Critical level for potassium is much lower, as Chris was saying, but it's just saying potentially highly magnesic soils we should be increasing our critical levels. But this is just soil chemistry. What happens when we start looking at plants? Our next step was we leached these soils just to see if we've got that amount in solution, does that correspond to how much can be taken away? So sort of simulating plant removal in a very, very rough sort of way. And we get the same results. If you've got 1 centimole, we pull about 0.6 of a centimole out of the soil. In Birchall, 1 centimole gives you about half a centimole on the high magnesium soil and about 0.7, 0.75 on the other soil. So the difference is still showing up there. One of the problems with that, though, is that potassium uptake by plant roots is partly due to really polyspecific ion pumps in the roots. So concentration in the soil solution isn't necessarily the driver. Next step was, okay, so we've got 2 different effects showing up there. How common are they? So we've got 9 different soils. This solid red line is the Armadale soil that shows that difference. The dotted red line is the in-growth soil that doesn't. And you can see really there's nothing that's got a nice slope on it increasing like this. Most of them tend to be fairly flat, except for this one soil from Malali, which seems to be just a bit of an outlier. It's all over the place. So this may not be all that important anyway, if there is something showing up there. Exactly what's going on, not too sure. Some of the literature suggests it might be due down to organic matter. Unfortunately, they didn't really explain why they thought it was organic matter. Could possibly also be dispersion of the clay, so as we're putting a lot more magnesium in, we're breaking down the soil structure, and the Armadale soil was really well structured, so it could break down. The in-growth soil, very weakly structured, and it just slaked as soon as we put it into solution. So this mechanisms, working out the mechanisms, one of the things I'm up to next. What about sodicity? Basically use the same technique to create some sodic soils. Again, I grabbed 8 different soils from across the region and came up with some really nice results here. These ones only came out of the lab last week, so Mike hasn't actually seen them yet. But what we've got here is, again, for a given level of potassium in the soil solution, as your exchangeable sodium increases, you end up with more potassium on the exchange complex. There's less pressure to keep it away from the exchange complex. And we've got 3 groups of soils, which is really unusual. It tends to be tied in with cation exchange capacity, so these have a CEC somewhere between 20 and 40, 40 and 60, and over 60, which saying a couple of things, I suppose. One is that if this is our critical level, so 0.35 millimole, which is what was in this solution, if that's our critical level in these different soils, if we've got a typical soil with not much sodium, our critical level for these low ones is about 1 centimole. For the intermediate CECs, it's up to 2, and for the really high, it's up to 3 or 4. So, as Chris was saying, our highest CEC soils probably do have a higher critical level of potassium. this one I'm just trying to graph it, so instead of having actual numbers, I'm just using percentages. So potassium saturation percentage, so it's like an exchangeable sodium percentage against ESP. Brings the lines a bit closer together, but there's still a lot of wobble in there, which I haven't quite worked out what's going on. Okay, but are those effects relevant when it comes to plant uptake? As I mentioned, there's competition between cations as the plants are actually taking them up. And there's also the effect of soil physical conditions as well. So we've got a crop trial over in Armidale, which is being harvested at the moment. Again, we've got those different cations, so low magnesium, high magnesium. Using PAM to remove physical impediments in the soil. And we're just looking at growth and nutrient uptake. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks away from actually having any results on this one. Okay. While I don't have any results, there are a few other papers around, bits and pieces people have been doing. So Kylie Dodd, who was an agronomist down at Moree, probably 10 years ago, did a PhD looking at sodic soils and phosphorus uptake. And she did something similar, created sodic soils. What she found was increasing levels of ESP, exchangeable sodium. In this soil there was about 1.8 centimoles of potassium. As you increase sodicity, the amount of potassium in the soil solution dropped. So basically what we were finding, we also found that increasing sodium reduced the amount of potassium in the youngest mature leaf. So this blue line here, which is saying really that yes, increasing sodicity reduces potassium uptake. But when she put PAM in, ended up with no effect at all, suggesting that what we do actually have happening is a lot of can be attributed to poor soil conditions. In addition to that, she had a hydroponic system, and increased sodium levels actually increased potassium uptake slightly, which seems to be a little bit counterintuitive. But cation competition, that can actually happen. So it looks like the soil physical problems could actually be a major part of what's going on, despite the fact that there's 3 or 4 different things happening. Okay, so in summary, we are getting some differences in potassium in solution, and the more magnesium, well, the more sodium in particular, the less potassium. Magnesium is still a question mark, but the physical problems of magnesic soils or sodic soils may actually turn out to be what's controlling potassium uptake. If that's the case, maybe we should be using manure on our sodic soils to supply potassium and overcome some of the soil physical constraints at the same time.
Good, thanks Craig. Just thank Craig for